I was walking to the studio this morning, cutting through the park, and I saw a guy asleep on a bench. He had the layers of coats, the bags, the whole image. And I did what I think 99% of us do.
Mm-hmm.
I clocked him. I felt a quick pang of, I don't know, pity, maybe a little discomfort. And then I kept walking. I filed him away in my brain under the single category of homelessness.
It's a reflex, isn't it? We have this mental snapshot, almost like a stock photo of what homelessness is.
Right.
It's the rough sleeper, the tent under the overpass, the person asking for change at the intersection. That's the folder it goes into.
Exactly. But after reading through the stack of research for today's deep dive, I realized that my mental snapshot isn't just incomplete. It's actually profoundly misleading. That guy on the bench,
Yeah.
he's the exception, not the rule. He's what we're allowed to see.
He is the visible tip of a massive submerged iceberg. I mean, if you only look at the street, you are missing the vast majority of the crisis. It's not even close.
So today, we are going to look under the water. We are going to completely dismantle this idea that homelessness is just about rooflessness. We're going to talk about net cafe refugees in Japan who go to work every day in suits, but sleep in these tiny little cubicles.
Or the families living out of their cars in a Walmart parking lot.
Exactly. Or the hidden homeless, the families couch surfing through the suburbs, hoping they don't wear out their welcome.
And we are going to tackle the uncomfortable why. We're moving away from the sad news story frame. I think we have to. We need to look at this as a systemic engineering failure.
A system failure, not a person failing.
For the most part, yes. Homelessness isn't usually a character flaw. It's a process. It's a slope that people slide down, often triggered by things that happened to them decades before they ever lost their keys.
And we're going to get into the economics, which, spoiler alert, just blew my mind.
Yeah.
The math suggests it is literally more expensive for us, for society, to keep people on the street than to house them.
It's fiscally irresponsible to not solve it. It's a wild thought.
It's completely wild. But okay, before we get to the solutions, we have to define what we're actually looking at. Because even the word homeless it's really tricky.
It is. And language matters here because it shapes policy. It shapes how we think. If you think homelessness equals sleeping outside, then your solution is just, build a shelter. Problem solved.
Check the box.
Right. But the United Nations has a much, much wider definition.
I have the UN definition right here. In 2004, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs defined a homeless household as one without shelter that falls within the scope of living quarters. That sounds surprisingly bureaucratic.
It is, but look at how they break it down. In Europe, they use a typology called ethos. It's a framework that frames homelessness not as a static state like you are or you aren't, but as a spectrum of exclusion.
A spectrum, not a light switch.
Exactly. Think about it physically, legally, and socially. So you have rooflessness, which is the street. That's the obvious one.
The guy on the bench.
The guy on the bench. But then you have houselessness. This is where you have a place to sleep, but it's a shelter or a temporary institution. You don't have a key. You don't have autonomy.
So you have a roof, but you don't have a home. You have no control.
Precisely. Then there's insecure housing. Maybe you're renting illegally, or you're under threat of eviction, or there's domestic violence in the home. You have a roof, and you have a key, but you have zero safety. Ethos counts that as a form of homelessness.
And that it massively expands the numbers. I mean, the scale changes completely when you define it that way.
It does.
And I noticed in the reading there's a distinct shift in how we talk about the people involved. We are trying really hard not to use the homeless as a noun.
Right. And for good reason. The Associated Press, for instance, changed their style book on this in 2020. When you say the homeless, it sounds like a different species, like the birds or the trees. It implies a permanent monolithic identity.
It effectively dehumanizes them. It groups everyone. The veteran with PTSD, the teenager who aged out of foster care, the family fleeing abuse. It just lumps them all into one category.
Exactly. The preferred term now is people experiencing homelessness or unhoused people. It uses person-first language. It reminds us that this is a situation happening to a human being, not the definition of that human being.
Speaking of definitions in history, I have to take us on a little detour here because I fell down a total rabbit hole on the historical terms. I always thought hobo, tramp, and vagrant were just old-timey insults.
Synonyms for being poor and on the move?
Yeah, I thought they were all the same thing.
Most people do. If you call someone a tramp today, it's just an insult. But if you
Yeah.
were riding the rails in America in 1890, getting those terms mixed up could actually get you into a fist fight.
No way.
Oh, yeah. There was a strict class system on the road, a real hierarchy.
Okay, so lay out the hierarchy for me. Who was at the top of the freight train food chain?
That would be the hobo.
Really? The hobo is the aristocrat. That's not what I would have guessed.
Absolutely. The hobo was an itinerant worker. That is the crucial distinction. Hobos were often skilled laborers who traveled the country following the work.
So they're not avoiding work, they're chasing it.
They're chasing it. They followed the harvest, they worked on construction, they laid railroad track, they often carried their own tools. They called themselves the Knights of the Road.
Knights of the road. I love that. So they had a kind of a professional pride.
A huge amount of pride. They were a vital part of the industrial economy. They had a code of ethics, and they definitely looked down on the other groups.
Okay, so that brings us to the tramp.
The tramp travels, just like the hobo, but the tramp chooses not to work. He wanders.
The classic, I dream of a life of travel and leisure, but I have $0.
Right. I wander, but I do not toil. And then at the very bottom of this social ladder, you had the vagrant or the bum.
Okay.
The bum neither travels nor works. They stay in one place and typically rely on begging or drinking.
So if you called a hardworking hobo a bum, you were insulting his entire work ethic, his whole identity.
You were saying he'd given up. And historically, this matters because the public perception shifts between these archetypes. In good economic times, we tend to see unhoused people as tramps or bums, lazy people refusing to work.
Individual moral failing.
Right. But in bad economic times, like the Great Depression, we start to see them as hobos, as victims of the economy, just looking for a chance.
That brings us right back to the present day. We aren't dealing with people hopping steam trains anymore, for the most part. We're dealing with a modern crisis. And going back to that iceberg analogy, the research divides this into primary and secondary homelessness.
This is the data distinction that explains why the counts are always, always wrong. Primary homelessness is what you saw in the park this morning.
Rough sleeping, no shelter, the visible tip.
Right. Secondary homelessness is the hidden mass beneath the water. This is couch surfing. This is staying in emergency accommodation. This is living in your car.
And then there's the hidden homeless, the people who never even show up in the stats.
These are the people who are terrified of the system, often for very good reasons. They might be squatting in an abandoned building or staying on private property where no one can see them. Because they aren't on a street corner, they aren't counted in the census or the point-in-time counts that cities conduct.
The point-in-time count. That's where volunteers go out for one night a year and literally try to count heads, right?
Yes. And just think about how flawed that methodology is. If you are a woman fleeing domestic violence, are you going to be sleeping on a park bench where you can be easily seen and counted?
Absolutely not.
Oh, sure.
You are going to make yourself as invisible as humanly possible.
Exactly. You are going to hide.
Right.
Which brings up a huge demographic surprise for me in the research. The stats say homelessness is overwhelmingly male. Something like 70% in the U.S. I saw one stat for Dublin that was 85% male.
Yeah.
But looking at this hidden definition, are we just missing the women?
We are absolutely missing the women. It's not even a question. Women's homelessness is often invisible because it relies on what researchers call transactional relationships.
That sounds ominous.
It is survival.
Yeah.
It's a woman staying with a man she doesn't want to be with, or even a man who is abusive because it provides a roof. She is trading her safety, her bodily autonomy, for shelter.
Because the alternative is so much more dangerous.
The alternative, sleeping on the street, opens her up to an almost certain risk of extreme sexual violence. So she doesn't look homeless on paper. She has an address. But she is absolutely unhoused in terms of safety and freedom. That's a sobering reality check. It makes the numbers we do have feel even heavier.
Yeah.
What are the global estimates we're looking at?
It's staggering, and honestly, the numbers feel almost too big to comprehend. In 2005, the UN estimated about 100 million homeless people worldwide.
Which is already a huge number.
A huge number. But looking at the trajectory of urbanization, displacement, and economic inequality, the estimate for 2025, that's next year, is around 330 million people experiencing absolute homelessness.
330 million. That's basically the entire population of the United States without a home.
And that's just absolute homelessness. If you expand the definition to include insecure housing people living in slums or dangerous overcrowded conditions, the number balloons to 1.6 billion.
1.6 billion. A fifth of the planet.
Yeah.
This feels like a good moment to ask the big philosophical question that keeps coming up in all the texts. Is housing a human right?
If you look at the founding documents of our modern world, the answer is an unequivocal yes. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25, passed in 1948, explicitly lists housing as part of the right to an adequate standard of living.
Right alongside food and clothing.
Yes, it's considered a fundamental building block.
But I feel like there is a big terms and conditions asterisk next to that, especially in the U.S.
There is a massive cultural disconnect. Former President Jimmy Carter did an interview back in 2017 where he touched on this. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, "A lot of people don't look at housing as a human right, but it is. In the U.S., we culturally view housing as a commodity.
It's an asset, an investment.
It's a reward for working hard. It's a marker of success. It's not viewed as a baseline requirement for being alive, like clean water."
Which explains why our history of dealing with this is so, well, so punitive. I was reading about the UK history in the source notes, and it seems like for 600 years, the basic strategy has been make it illegal and painful to be poor.
It really has been. And go back to the English Poor Laws of 1383.
1383, we are talking medieval times after the Black Death.
Right. And the law basically said that if you were a vagabond, someone wandering without visible means of support, you were a criminal. The assumption was idleness. By 1547, the law was so harsh that vagrants could be branded with a V on their chest and sentenced to 2 years of servitude.
Branded, like cattle, for being poor.
It established a deep legal precedent. Homelessness is a moral failing. It is a character defect that needs to be punished out of you.
And that led to the workhouses, right?
Yes, the workhouses and bridewells. These places gave you shelter, but they were intentionally designed to be miserable. The principle was called less eligibility.
The condition of the pauper must be less desirable than the condition of the lowest paid laborer.
Exactly. They were terrified that if charity was too nice, people would just stop working. And that fear, that idea of moral hazard, still underpins a lot of policy debates today.
But in the U.S., didn't the Great Depression change that? At least for a while.
Briefly, it had to. When 25% of the country is unemployed, you can't blame it all on individual laziness. The structural failure was just too obvious to ignore. That's when FDR and the New Deal brought in public housing on a large scale. It was a clear admission that the market had failed.
But then we hit the 1980s.
The 1980s were the pivot point. We saw massive cuts to federal affordable housing budgets. The federal government essentially stepped back and said, let the market handle it. And the market did what markets do.
It maximized profit, not housing security.
Exactly. And that's when the modern era of visible street homelessness, the crisis we see today, really began to spike.
Which leads us directly to the structural causes. We can't talk about homelessness without talking about gentrification.
It's the classic story we see in every major city. Wealthier people move into a low-income neighborhood, it's revitalized, property values go up, new coffee shops and boutiques open. But the people who lived there for generations, the people who made the neighborhood distinct in the first place, see their rents double or triple. They get pushed out.
And this brings us to that San Francisco study from 2019. I read this part 3 times because it felt like a complete logic puzzle. It's about rent control.
This is where economics gets really, really counterintuitive.
Okay, so the premise of rent control is simple. Freeze the rent or limit increases so people don't get displaced. And the study said it worked.
In a very specific way, yes. It worked for the people inside the apartments. If you were a tenant in a rent-controlled unit in San Francisco in 1994, you were roughly 20% less likely to be displaced over the next few years. For you, individually, you were safe.
Great. Mission accomplished. Problem solved.
Not quite. Enter what economists call the Cobra effect, the unintended consequence that makes the problem worse. While the tenants stayed put, the landlords reacted. They aren't charities. They are running a business. They looked at their buildings and said, I can't raise the rent to market rates, so this is now a bad investment.
So what did they do with their bad investment?
They utilized a loophole in the law. They converted their rental units into condos or TICS tenancy in common.
I see those tick signs everywhere in cities. What does that actually mean?
It's a way of selling a building to a group of people who own it together, rather than one person renting it out to many people. Essentially, the landlord takes the unit off the rental market and puts it onto the sales market. They cash out.
So the apartment still exists, but it's no longer available for rent. It's for sale to someone wealthy enough to buy it.
Precisely. And the study found that because of this loophole, the overall supply of rental housing in San Francisco dropped by 15%.
15%. That is a massive chunk of inventory to just vanish from the rental market.
It's huge. And when supply drops that hard and demand stays high or even increases,
prices explode for everyone else. for every apartment that's left.
Right. So while rent control protected the incumbents, the people lucky enough to already be inside, it pulled up the drawbridge for everyone else. It fueled the citywide rent increase. It actually accelerated the gentrification it was trying to fight by making the remaining market rate apartments incredibly expensive.
That is maddening. It's like squeezing a balloon. The problem just bulges out somewhere else, even bigger.
That's the structural side. But I want to zoom in on the individual level because there is a statistic in these sources that fundamentally changed how I view the person on the street. We need to talk about traumatic brain injury, or TBI.
This was the biggest aha moment for me in all the reading. We assume that if someone has a brain injury on the street, it's because they got beat up or fell down while they were homeless. It's a result of their situation.
That's the common assumption. It's a consequence. But a major Canadian survey completely flipped the causality on its head. They found that TBI is incredibly widespread among homeless populations, far, far higher than in the general public. But the key finding was the timing. For around 70% of the respondents, the brain injury happened before the onset of homelessness.
So the injury might be the cause, not the effect.
It's a massive potential cause, a smoking gun. We need to walk through what a TBI actually does to a person. It's not just headaches or memory loss. It strikes at the very core of what we call executive function.
Executive function, that's like the brain's CEO,
Right.
the air
That's
traffic
a perfect
officer.
analogy. It's the ability to plan, to organize, to regulate your emotions, to foresee consequences, to manage time. Think about the administrative burden of modern life.
Oh, it's huge.
Paying bills on time, showing up to work every day, navigating a dispute with a landlord without screaming at them, filling out complex forms, all the invisible tasks of just being a functional adult.
Right.
If you have a severe TBI, that part of your brain is compromised. It's damaged. You might have the money for rent, but you simply cannot organize the multi-step task of getting the check and mailing it on time. You might lose your job because you have poor impulse control and lashed out at a manager.
And if you don't have a strong safety net, a family that understands what's happening,
You unravel. Your support network burns out because you're suddenly difficult or unreliable. Eventually, you end up on the street. It reframes homelessness not as a moral failing or a lifestyle choice, but as a potential medical outcome. If a person had a broken leg, we'd offer a crutch. If they have a broken executive function, we evict them.
and that ties into the childhood predictors too. The data on foster care is just heartbreaking.
It is a pipeline. A history of being in foster care and frequent moving during childhood are massive predictors of adult homelessness. If you age out of the foster care system at 18 with no family support, no accumulated wealth, and no safety net,
You're on your own at 18.
you are statistically incredibly vulnerable to falling through the cracks.
So we have these huge structural forces like the housing market, and we have these deeply personal triggers like TBI and childhood trauma. But I feel like we have to address the choice argument because you hear it all the time. Oh, some of them just want to live like that. They don't want rules. They prefer being free.
Look, does that person exist? Sure. There is an exceedingly small sliver of the population that consciously rejects societal norms and chooses a nomadic lifestyle. But the research is overwhelming on this point. For the vast, vast majority, homelessness is what's called involuntary displacement.
It's not a choice. It's a lack of choices, a lack of options.
Exactly. It is a game of musical chairs where the music stopped and there wasn't a chair left for them. It's not a preference for sleeping in the rain.
So let's talk about that experience,
Yeah.
sleeping in the rain. We have a segment here we're calling The Daily Battle, and honestly, it sounds like a war zone. It's not just the elements, it's the city itself that's actively fighting you.
We call this hostile architecture. It is urban design that is specifically engineered to exclude certain human bodies and certain human behaviors.
I've seen this, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Benches that are slanted so you slide off if you try to lie down.
Or benches with that third armrest bolted right into the middle. It looks like a convenience, but its only purpose is to prevent someone from lying down.
And the spikes, the metal studs in doorways.
The London spikes in 2014 were a real turning point in public awareness. A luxury apartment building installed these metal studs in the ground-level alcoves to stop people from sleeping there, and it caused an uproar because it was just so visually aggressive.
It's just so blatant.
It was the city saying, "You are vermin. We will make this space physically painful for you to occupy."
But this goes back further than 2014. The notes mention Robert Moses, the legendary and controversial New York urban planner.
Moses was a master of exclusion through infrastructure. He designed the parkways leading out to Jones Beach on Long Island with intentionally low overpasses.
Too low for...
Too low for public buses. He wanted the beach to be for people who owned cars, the white middle and upper classes. He physically engineered the poor, who relied on public transit, out of the space. Hostile architecture today is just the modern, smaller-scale evolution of that same idea.
And if the architecture doesn't get you, the bureaucracy will.
Oh.
The ID catch-22. This sounds like a nightmare loop from a Kafka novel.
It's a perfect trap. To get a home, you need a job.
Okay.
To get a job, you need a government-issued ID.
Makes sense.
To get an ID, you need a permanent address to have it mailed to. And often you need other documents, like a birth certificate.
But you don't have an address. That's the whole problem.
So you're stuck. And here's the kicker. When cities conduct sweeps, when they raid homeless camps to clear them out, what happens to people's possessions?
It all gets thrown in a dumpster. Tents, sleeping bags, everything.
Including their backpacks, which often contain their documents, their birth certificates, their social security cards, their old IDs. When you lose those, you effectively cease to exist in the system. You lose your citizenship, in a practical sense.
Yeah.
You're erased.
And physically.
Oh.
I need to ask you about street feed.
Yeah.
I had never heard this term before, and the description was just horrific.
It's a condition that soldiers in World War I knew as trench foot. And it is a medical crisis caused by a simple solvable problem: a lack of dry socks.
Just wet socks, that's the cause.
That's it. If you are walking all day in a city and your feet get wet from rain or sweat, and you cannot take your shoes off for days or weeks at a time because you're afraid they'll be stolen while you sleep, the tissue begins to macerate. It breaks down.
Okay.
It leads to fungal infections, open ulcers, nerve damage, and eventually gangrene and amputation.
All because of a lack of laundry and a safe place to sleep.
It's a completely preventable problem that leads to permanent disability. And the victimization stats also blew my mind. We are taught to be afraid of the dangerous hobo from the time we're kids. The data flips that narrative entirely. People experiencing homelessness are far, far more likely to be victims of violent crime than perpetrators. They are incredibly vulnerable. There's a concept in psychology called desanitizing.
Desanitizing, what's that?
It's when we stop viewing another human being as a person and instead see them as a pathogen, a dirty thing, a threat to hygiene and order. When you view someone as a germ, you don't feel empathy for them, you feel disgust. And that disgust can license violence. It's why hate crimes against the homeless are often so brutal and random.
This is a heavy picture. But I think it's important to realize this isn't just a U.S. problem or a UK problem. I want to take this global tour we've mapped out because the way different cultures handle this or hide this is fascinating. Let's start in Asia. Japan.
Japan is unique. After their economic bubble burst in the 90s, homelessness became more visible in the traditional sense. But more recently, we've seen the rise of these net cafe refugees.
I've read about this. These are people with jobs, right? They're not unemployed.
Often, yes. They are the working poor. They can't afford the massive upfront costs of a Japanese apartment.
Yeah.
The key money, the security deposit, the guarantor fees. So they live in 24-hour internet cafes.
What does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
Imagine a small cubicle, maybe 6 feet by 4 feet, with a reclining chair, a computer, and a door that locks. It's quiet, it's relatively safe. You can buy instant noodles from a vending machine. You can pay a few extra dollars for a shower. It costs maybe $15 or $20 a night.
But it's not a home.
It's not a home. You have no privacy, no space for possessions beyond a small bag. It's a form of invisible homelessness. If you saw them on the subway in their work suit, you would never, ever know.
And then there are the McRefugees.
Right. People who spend their nights in 24-hour McDonald's restaurants, nursing a single coffee just to have a warm, well-lit place to sit until morning.
Moving to China, the system there seems to enforce a kind of a caste system based on where you were born.
The hukou system. It's a household registration system. If you are born in a rural village, you have a rural hukou. If you move to Beijing or Shanghai for a construction job, you are physically in the city, but legally you are still a villager.
So you don't get the city perks. You're an outsider.
You don't get access to subsidized housing, to urban health care, or to public schools for your children. You are a migrant in your own country. It creates this massive floating population of hundreds of millions of people that live in precarious, substandard housing on the literal and figurative edges of the city.
Then you go to India, and the sheer scale of it all just explodes.
India challenges our Western definitions because the numbers are so vast. We are talking about pavement dwellers Entire families who live, cook, sleep, and raise children entirely on the sidewalk. It's their home.
And there's this bizarre phenomenon of slum tourism.
The slumdog millionaire effect. Tourists paying money to take walking tours of the Dharavi slum in Mumbai.
That feels, I don't know, gross, like a human zoo.
It's ethically very complex. Supporters say it brings money and awareness to the area that wouldn't get there otherwise. Critics say it fetishizes poverty and turns human suffering into an attraction. But it highlights how visible and integrated poverty is there compared to how we try to hide it and push it to the margins in the West.
What about Russia? The Soviet history is really interesting here.
Well, the Soviet Union claimed to have abolished homelessness.
How do you just abolish homelessness? Did they build enough houses for everyone?
No, they made it a crime to be homeless. Everyone had to have a propiska, which was a residency permit stamped in their internal passport. If you were stopped by the police and didn't have one, you could be prosecuted for social parasitism.
So if you're homeless, you go to jail. Problem solved.
Essentially, it hid the problem by criminalizing the victim. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the whole system fell apart. The propiska system was gone, state housing guarantees vanished, and there was a massive explosion of homelessness. People were selling their apartments for vodka or getting scammed out of their deeds by organized crime. The mortality rate for homeless people in Russia in the 90s was just horrific.
And finally, let's look at Europe. We see a really stark contrast between North and South.
Scotland is often held up as the gold standard right now. They have a right to housing that is actually legally enforceable. If you are unintentionally homeless, the local government must find you a permanent home.
It's a right, not a charity.
It's a legal entitlement.
Yeah.
And in Greece, they have a term I'd never heard. Seismopathis.
Earthquake struck.
It refers to people made homeless by natural disasters. In Greece, you have entire communities of formerly middle-class people living in these container cities for years, sometimes decades, after an earthquake. It's a powerful reminder that nature doesn't care about your bank account. You can do everything right in your life and still lose your home in 10 seconds.
Okay, so we've defined the problem, we've toured the world, we've seen the history. Now we have to talk about solutions.
Yeah.
Because the most frustrating thing about reading these sources is the realization that we know what works. We just don't seem to want to do it.
We have the cure. We just struggle with the political will to administer the prescription.
Love walk about housing first. This seems to be the big revolutionary shift in thinking.
For decades, the model was treatment first, or what's sometimes called the staircase model.
Explain that. What's the staircase?
Yeah. The idea was, you are homeless because you have problems. Drug addiction, alcoholism, mental health issues. So before you deserve a house, you have to fix those problems. You have to get sober while living in a shelter. Then maybe you graduate to transitional housing. Then, if you're good, if you follow all the rules, you finally get a key to your own apartment. Each step is a reward.
It sounds logical to a certain Puritan part of the brain, earn your keep. You have to prove you're ready.
But practically, it fails constantly. Imagine trying to recover from a heroin addiction while sleeping in a crowded room with 50 other strangers, guarding your shoes so they don't get stolen, and getting kicked out onto the street at 7 a.m. every morning. It's impossible. You cannot build a life on quicksand.
So housing first just flips the entire script.
Completely. It says give them the apartment first, no conditions, no sobriety tests, just here is a safe, lockable door. Then once they are stable, once they aren't in survival mode 24/7, you bring in the social workers, the addiction counselors, the job training. You offer help, but you don't mandate it.
And does it actually work?
The retention rates are massive. In study after study, people stay housed at rates of 80 or 90%. It turns out it's a lot easier to stop drinking when you aren't freezing to death under a bridge. Stability is the foundation for recovery, not the reward for it.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I'm the skeptical taxpayer. I work 40 hours a week to pay my mortgage. It's a struggle. And you're telling me the solution is to take my tax dollars and just give a free apartment to someone who is actively using drugs. How is that fair?
It's a completely valid emotional reaction. It feels unfair. But if we can put our feelings aside for a moment and just look at the wallet test, the argument completely flips.
Okay. Show me the math.
Let's look at that big Central Florida study. They tracked the actual costs. When a person is chronically homeless, they aren't free to the system. They're constantly interacting with the most expensive public services we have.
Emergency rooms and police cars.
Exactly. The most expensive ride in the city is an ambulance. The most expensive hotel room is a jail cell or an ER bed. The study found that maintaining one person on the street, the cycle of ER visits, police calls, jail stays, court costs, Costs the public roughly $31,000 a year.
The $31,000 a year just to manage their misery and keep them moving.
Yes. Now compare that to permanent supportive housing. You pay their rent, you pay a case manager to check on them and connect them to services. The total cost, $10,051 a year.
So it is literally 3 times cheaper to just give them the house.
It is fiscal conservatism disguised as social progress. You are saving the taxpayer $20,000 per person per year by ending their homelessness. But politically, it's poison to try and sell.
Because it looks like a reward for bad behavior. We would rather pay $31,000 to punish someone than pay $10,000 to help them and save ourselves money.
That is the central paradox of American homelessness policy.
And speaking of punishment, the legal landscape in the U.S. just shifted dramatically in the other direction, away from solutions.
It did. In 2024, the Supreme Court ruled that cities can criminalize homeless camps, even if there is no shelter space available for people to go to.
Wait, explain that. Even if there are literally no beds in the entire city.
Yes. Previous lower court rulings had said you couldn't arrest someone for sleeping outside if they had nowhere else to go, that it amounted to cruel and unusual punishment for the status of being homeless. The Supreme Court overturned that. Now, cities have a green light to arrest and fine people for sleeping in public, regardless of shelter capacity.
So we are criminalizing the act of existing in public. If you don't have a home and there's no shelter bed, your very existence is illegal.
It returns us to a punitive approach, not unlike the vagrancy laws of the 1300s. It focuses on making the problem invisible by clearing the streets, not on actually solving the problem.
But there is innovation happening, too, on the ground. I want to end on some of the smarter ideas that are bubbling up. Cargo texture.
I love this. It's using shipping containers to build housing. They are modular, they're stackable, and they're incredibly strong. The Hope on Alvarado project in LA is a great example. You can build apartment buildings out of them, and it drastically cuts down construction time and cost.
And there's also just acknowledging reality like the safe parking programs.
This is such a pragmatic and humane solution. Santa Barbara has done this really well. They acknowledge that for many, many people, their car is their last asset. It is their home.
And usually, if you're found sleeping in your car, you get a ticket or you get towed, and then you're really and truly screwed.
Exactly. So Santa Barbara created legal, designated lots. You can park there overnight. There is security. There are portable toilets and hand-washing stations. You don't get harassed by the police. It stabilizes people enough so they can keep their jobs and try to get back into housing. It turns the car into a stepping stone, not a trap.
And finally, empowerment. The idea of giving people a voice and a purpose.
Things like street newspapers. You see these in many cities around the world. It's not begging. The person buys the papers for a small fee, say 25 cents, and sells them for $1 or $2. It's a job. It's a micro business. It requires salesmanship, money management. It builds dignity.
And voting.
This is huge. Ensuring people experiencing homelessness can vote gives them a voice in the very policies that affect their lives. When you have no address, registering to vote is a bureaucratic nightmare. But advocates are fighting to ensure that Park Bench, corner of Main and First, or Salvation Army Shelter is a valid address for registration.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from the hobo on the train tracks to the net cafe refugee in Tokyo to the working family living in a sedan in a church parking lot.
It's a massive, complex spectrum.
And the big takeaway for me at the end of the day is that homelessness isn't usually about a person failing. It's about systems failing. The housing market, the healthcare system, the foster care system.
It is the cracks in society. And some people fall through those cracks.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought from the source material that really stuck with me. It describes home, not just as a shelter, but as an extension of self and identity. When we deny someone a home, we aren't just denying them a roof. We are denying them a place in the human story.
It denies them the ability to be a citizen, to participate.
So here's the question for you to think about. If you lost your address today, just that one line of text on your driver's license, how long would your identity survive? Without the documents, the bank accounts, the ability to receive mail, the social standing that rely on it, how long until you were erased?
It's a terrifying thought.
Something to think about the next time you walk past that bench. Thanks for diving deep with us today.